edition of day 17 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. We've been hearing to even more evidence from Trevor Morris, who's it's day 2 of his questioning. I'm joined with Paul Heron from the Public Interest Law Centre, who's been, here all the time. How do you think it went today, then, Paul?
Well, it was an interesting day, and I thought there was some absolute corking laughs we had at times. Not that I would necessarily say that's the most important thing, but it was one of those days where, for my clients, I think having some issues raised and also settled, and I would say probably exposed the inconsistencies of the particular officer in his reporting of parts of the activities of the Anti-Nazi League and the Socialist Workers' Party being exposed, and the inconsistencies were exposed, I think, during the course of the evidence. And I think particularly in the afternoon, I personally would say, and I think speaking to my clients, they would also say that the officer was, let's say, floundering, I think, with the inconsistencies in his reports.
I mean, I think you'd be very charitable. He was all over the fucking shop. I mean, literally, some of the contradictions were, ridiculous and hilarious at the same time. I mean, some of the very blatant contradictions, I mean, without going into too much detail about it, but, there seemed to be, just a switching of, when you said that, Chris Banbury was setting up the hitters group, but he was being stopped by Julie Waterson, and then Julie Waterson was setting up the hitters group, and it was just you're all over the place, mate. And he wouldn't accept it. He wouldn't accept this contradiction. I mean, he's very big on this double think. There was one bit where he was talking about how he was a committed activist, and that was for real, by the way. He wasn't pretending. And it's like, what are you on about?
I think what I'm saying is the documentation, the official documentation of the Anti-Nazi League was very consistent. It was about mass action to defeat the fascists. And by mass action, that doesn't mean taking everybody on a demonstration necessarily. It's about leaflets in the estates, leafleting in the workplace, education, of getting people mobilised to defeat, at that time, the BNP, trying to learn the lessons, I suppose, of the 1970s as well. So on that side, it was very much the mass action of mass protest, etc. And that was consistent throughout the public documentation. His reports also reflected that on one level, but then he claimed that there was some kind of nefarious other strategy going on. And as you say, quite rightly, is that 1 minute it was allegedly Chris Banbury, and then the next minute it was Julie Wharton, and then the next minute it was, and this wasn't sanctioned by the CC, and then it was kind of in a roundabout way. And there was just inconsistencies throughout the whole issue. And then, of course, we're going to come on to the accusation of arson on the day of the BNP bookshop, which,
is hilarious, because he admits that there was no they had no materials to start a fire. I mean, I wouldn't trust him to start a fire, because he doesn't seem to know how to. He claimed that they went in on the train, but the train didn't stop at the right station, so they went back to Hackney and got a coach in. And I think Barr did very well to sort of break down, well, you were at this stewards meeting, you were at this place, you were at this. The times just didn't add up. But he was adamant. I mean, what I was surprised about was that I didn't quite realise at first, but that he only brought up this accusation of arson in 2013 to Operation Hearn, that there was no contemporaneous reports of his from the time at all.
So what he was trying to lean on was a meeting. There's a report of a meeting of the Hackney branches of the SWP, where there was a meeting where he was like, look, we've got to get out, we've got a leaflet, we've got to make sure that there's a turnout, because, of course, it's important to have a mass mobilisation of as many people as possible. But from that meeting, he was trying to draw the conclusion that not only did Banbury want to have this big hitters squad, but then on the morning of the demonstration, of course, he was going to, as you say, Banbury, along with a number of other people he allegedly named, the officer named, would go down via early in the morning on a train, buy presumably the petrol and all the rest of it, and set fire to the BNP headquarters. And as he was asked the questions, it became I think it became clear that, well, he was telling porky pies. Let's be honest about it. I mean, there's a number of things. If the planning meeting, you couldn't remember when it happened. Going down on the train first thing in the morning. The demonstration would have already been policed from probably 6-7 a.m. Buying petrol or whatever on the way, where you're going to find something open. And also, we know, and I'm sure all court participants know, that officers had access to a car. All of them had cars. The officer in question had a car. Why not go in the car? Wouldn't it make sense to do that? I'm not obviously trying to strategize about how you do this. But and the other thing that we presented as part of our evidence on behalf of Lindsay was a photograph of the BNP headquarters, which is it's not a bookshop. It's kind of like a Mein Kampf Waterstones, if you like. It's but it's fortified. There's no way you're going to get near that. And also, there's not even a letterbox. So. I'm not, it was so inconsistent and so ridiculous. I think it was the whole argument and the whole, kind of the point this officer was making these allegations. I think it's ridiculous.
It's the sort of thing that if some bloke down the pub started telling this story, anybody who's listening would have just ignored it and moved on. I mean, the fact that it was being entertained. I mean, obviously, because of the nature of the proceedings and lawyers asking questions and everything, you have to kind of go through this. But in the real world, anybody would go "Shut up, Trevor! What the fuck are you on about? Of course you fucking didn't."
Yeah. I think if he was in a meeting where this was discussed, or he was talking in an A&L meeting, or anything, people would just be like, "Shut the fuck!" Like you say, "What are you talking about, mate? What are you going on about? You've been on." It was so ridiculous. I think the counsel of the inquiry did a very good job of asking the questions, and I think that part of the evidence, there's so much of the evidence which is extremely questionable, but I think that part of the evidence is in fact destroyed. I really do think that. I can't think of anybody coming away from hearing that would think the officer was telling the truth. I think he wasn't.
I mean, I don't think anybody coming away from following today's evidence would think that officer ever tells the truth. I mean, I think he undermined everything he said because he was so ridiculous. Some of the things that he was saying, and he literally couldn't handle it. He couldn't. We've seen some of the former undercover officers go like, "Oh, I may have been wrong. Oh, I'm not sure about that." He's like, "Yeah, no, definitely, straight away. Yes, the report is right." Yeah. When it's pointed out to him that it's not, he's like, "No, you don't understand. You see, you don't understand." I mean, my favourite one that he argued, there was two of them. One where he started arguing with the current commissioner of the Met, saying that he doesn't understand special branch. Yeah. And the second one, which I thought was hilarious, was him trying to school the SWP on the Russian Revolution and the role of the Germans used Lenin to undermine the Tsar. And I mean, there was my favourite point, I think, of the whole inquiry so far, where David Barr just went, "Going back to the streets of London," which got a huge laughter from the room because. What the hell was he going on about? I mean, you got the impression that he'd got schooled at some education day 30 years ago and would be trying to think up the comeback for the whole time, and this was his opportunity. Weird.
It was very strange. It was very strange. I mean, I didn't think the answer was ever going to end, actually, and it was a very strange answer. And I think there's a point where I think he's trying to be almost too clever, but actually falling over, rather than, like you say, other officers just keeping their answers simple. I think they talk about Enron. There's a documentary about Enron called The Smartest Guys in the Room, and they fell on their arse. And I think to a certain extent, he's a little bit like that. I'm the smartest guy in the room, but the reality is, he's tripping himself up. I think you're right. He comes in very certain, but he's just not convincing at all. He's absolutely not convincing. There were, of course, a few gems during the course of the evidence, which we'll obviously need to study in terms of the transcript that he said. But yeah, I think it's a really. I came away very happy because obviously my clients were very much involved, as other people were, but speaking for my clients, very involved with with Trevor Morris, as in not involved personally, but obviously as members of the A&L and the SWP, etc. And I think coming away, I think they feel happy that what they appear justice being done, that this officer's been put on the spot, and he's, in my view, certainly he's been found, I think, on very clearly on many things, found to be lying actually. And I think the reports exaggerate. I think sometimes the reports he's written take one snippet of something somebody said to him, and suddenly it's like the truth. And I'm just staggered that this kind of evidence was accepted in any way, shape, or form all those years ago. I'm really worried, just in a purely democratic way, at the extent of the reporting, the extent of the policing in the last tranche and this tranche. When you look at meetings where literally 30, 40, 50, 60, hundreds of people have had files opened on them, and this is just staggering, the extent of people who have had files. What wasn't asked by David Barr, which we wanted him to ask, was the issue of trade unions. The amount of trade unions that this officer reported on is quite staggering. But what is really, I think, an extremely worrying, and it is a trade union issue, the amount of trade unions that have files, NALGO, COSI, I mean, some of them old trade unions, Unison, Unite, the T&G, all have files opened by special branch, and the question has got to be, why? Why are things that are legitimate in a democratic society, campaigning for workers' rights, campaigning... Now, the argument that's being used is, well, we were spying on the SWP, but it doesn't mean you have to, not that that's legitimate, but that I think at times the undercover policing units have used left-wing groups, anarchist groups, as a smokescreen to actually, as a platform to spy on other groups, whether they be justice campaigns, trade unions. None of it's legitimate, but when you look at that kind of thing, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting, and it should be a real concern. And why the press, the media, do not cover this more than they do. It's an absolute outrage. And on top of that, tomorrow, which we will hear, we know that this officer had sexual relations with women who did not know he was a police officer. It's an absolute national scandal, which should be number one in the news, number two in the national news. This should be covered a lot more, and the fact that it isn't is a disgrace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got a little bit of media coverage today because of his comments about the role of the security services in smearing people, which was kind of unusual. We haven't seen that much kind of coverage, but it was kind of a throwaway remark. I mean, it was a great bit of footage, but it doesn't really go to the heart of the issue about what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting that there was a throwaway remark about the security services, and I think it's a real shame that, in fact, I know it's possibly pushing at the edges of the remit of this inquiry, but a lot of the tasking that these officers undertook was on the say-so of the security services. And we've also got to say that government ministers knew about what this unit was doing, and it goes a lot higher. So, yeah, you've got this guy today, effectively a foot soldier, being absolutely shown to be lying and whatever. But actually, I would really like it if one of the officers would just break ranks and say, yeah, I did this. I'm not happy with what I did, but I was tasked by, and actually named a few people that they were tasked by, because these people the officers were tasked by security service, government, ministers and senior civil servants. And we get, as you know, at the last tranche, we got a detailed statement from MI5. They should be given evidence. Why did you task? Why did you task the police? And they should be given evidence here. But unfortunately, they're not. All we get is one statement. And I think the security services also have to be answering to why task officers to look at particular things. One of the things that was also a concern is the reports on international visitors, and that's another thing which I think, where did those reports go to? So, we're today was an interesting day, and my clients a good day, I suppose. But obviously, we'll have to see how things go going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a few bits today just to wrap up quickly because we want to get out of here, and I think we'll get thrown out of here fairly soon anyway. Yeah. But like, there was a couple of things where he said that Bobby Seale was a hero of his. Yeah. Which I don't reckon Bobby Seale would felt the same way about you, Trevor. I think he might have fucking shot you, and you'd have fucking deserved it, you cunt. Anyway, on that note, cheers for joining me, Paul. Anything else you want to add about that?
No, I mean, just keep up the good work, Tom. Brilliant work.
Cheers, Paul. And you too, man. I mean, like one of the most personable lawyers. Probably, doesn't represent me at all in many ways, and I don't represent him in many ways. Let's just be clear about that. But probably my favourite. So, cheers. Thanks for this, Paul.
Oh, you say that to all the lawyers. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for joining us. We're back again tomorrow. There's more from Trevor Morris. I called him a cunt earlier. It's not true. He doesn't have the depth or the warmth. But he is a horrible person, and he will be giving more evidence tomorrow, which will be relating to his he was giving us about the relationships he had. I'll be doing a Twitter Spaces later on today, kind of covering that as well. Cheers.